Sundiata Keita, the man who would rise to found the Mali Empire, was born into a world where fate and lineage were intricately bound. His story is not merely one of political conquest, but one of destiny, struggle, and resilience. The life of Sundiata is embedded in the fabric of West African history, and the emergence of his empire is a testimony to the forces of nature and human while working in concert. Born to the mundane people of West Africa, Sundiata's early life was marked by a blend of tragedy and prophecy. He was not expected to be a great king. In fact, his birth was prophesied to be an omen of extraordinary potential, yet it was clouded by a sense of misfortune. His mother, Sagalin, was a woman of great wisdom and strength, but also one of extraordinary hardship. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, and her physical appearance became a point of derision and mockery for others in the court. This, in turn, led to Sundiata's own early years being filled with rejection. He was not expected to walk, much less become a warrior or king. But Sundiata's story is not simply about overcoming obstacles. It is about how those obstacles shaped the very core of his identity. His early life, though filled with ridicule, was the crucible in which his strength would be forged. The great lesson of Sundiata's formative years is that destiny is not given, it must be earned. His rise from a child thought to be weak to the man who would build one of the greatest empires in West African history is nothing short of miraculous. As Sundiata grew older, the challenges only seemed to deepen. His kingdom, the kingdom of Niani, was ruled by his father, King Nermaghan, a wise but fragile ruler. However, his reign was not without its political complexities. His chief wife, Sassoma, was a woman of ambition and jealousy, who saw Sundiata as a threat to her own son, Dankarantuman, the rightful heir. When Sundiata was born and the prophecy of his greatness became known, it was clear that Sassoma would do everything in her power to prevent Sundiata's rise. The tension between the two women was palpable, and Sassoma's malice would set in motion the chain of events that would ultimately change the course of history. Despite the tensions and growing animosity between the women, it was the arrival of the royal griot, a spiritual and storytelling figure, who would seal Sundiata's fate. The griot's prophecies were a part of the cultural fabric of the Mandang people, a reminder that power often lies in the hands of those who can shape the story. The griot recognized Sundiata's latent potential and, unlike others in the court who viewed him as weak, he saw a king in the making. His words were prophetic, but also encouraging, giving Sundiata the belief that his greatness was within reach, even though his body had yet to show its true strength. The tension in the court came to a head when Sassoma took drastic action to maintain her son's claim to the throne. She went so far as to influence her husband to banish Sundiata from the court, exiling him from his home and his birthright. In exile, Sundiata lived in the land of the Sasso people, a people far from his own. There, he found an opportunity to learn from new masters and grow into the man his kingdom needed. Yet at the same time, he was forced to confront the depths of his own vulnerability. It was here in the land of the Sasso that Sundiata would first encounter his future allies and begin to see the cracks in the political system that had once seemed invincible. The exile would become the turning point in Sundiata's life, as it was here that he would first begin to build the strength necessary to challenge his foes and claim his birthright. During his exile, Sundiata became something of a legend in his own right. His reputation as a warrior and leader spread far and wide, and his prowess in battle became the stuff of myth. It was not just his physical strength that made him formidable, but his mind, his capacity to see beyond the immediate, to understand the complexities of politics, and his deep empathy for his people. In his exile, he became a man of wisdom and foresight, and his fame grew, attracting followers and allies from various regions. But Sundiata's rise was never about mere conquest. It was about fulfilling the promise of his birthright and bringing justice to his people. He became a symbol of hope for the oppressed, a figure who embodied the power of perseverance and resilience in the face of adversity. As his power grew, so too did his understanding of the deep complexities of governance. The kingdoms around him, many of them small but fiercely independent, began to see Sundiata not just as a threat, but as a potential ally. The alliances he built were not based on force alone, but on mutual respect, shared understanding, and common purpose. He recognized the power of diplomacy, even as he was building his military strength. His leadership was not a mere reflection of his prowess in battle, but also of his ability to unite disparate peoples under one banner. But it was not all smooth sailing. The path to his destiny was fraught with challenges. The battle for the throne would not be won through diplomacy alone. Sundiata had to confront the forces of Sassoma and her supporters, forces who would stop at nothing to see Sundiata's rise thwarted. In the face of such opposition, Sundiata remained resolute, never losing sight of the larger vision. His allies, who had come to see him as a unifying force, rallied behind him. The courage and determination that Sundiata demonstrated during these years were a testament to his unwavering commitment to his people and his cause. The final confrontation came in the form of a great battle. The forces of Sassoma and her allies clashed with Sundiata's army, a decisive moment that would forever alter the course of history. Sundiata's victory in this battle was not just a victory on the battlefield, but a victory of spirit. It was a victory of perseverance, wisdom, and the ability to inspire others to see beyond the immediate, to understand the larger purpose for which they fought. When Sundiata returned to Niani, it was not just as a conqueror, but as a king who had fulfilled his destiny. His triumph was not the result of a single battle, but of years of struggle, sacrifice, and dedication. It was the culmination of a life spent building alliances, overcoming personal hardships, and never losing sight of his mission. His return to Niani marked the beginning of a new era, one that would see the rise of the Mali Empire as one of the most powerful and prosperous empires in African history. Sundiata's story is a reminder that greatness is not bestowed upon individuals. It is forged through trial and perseverance. It is a story that teaches the importance of resilience, wisdom, and the belief that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, one can rise to fulfill their true potential. His legacy, the Mali Empire, would go on to influence generations, shaping the course of African history for centuries to come. Sundiata Keita, the Lion King, is not just a historical figure, but a symbol of the enduring power of human determination and the belief that destiny is something to be claimed, not simply accepted. Sundiata Keita's rise to power was not a singular event, but a series of interconnected struggles, each one shaping the man he would become and the empire he would eventually establish. Following his exile, Sundiata's path back to power was not assured. The political landscape of West Africa was complex and fluid, and he faced numerous challenges that demanded more than just military strength or raw ambition. To secure his place as the future ruler of Mali, Sundiata had to navigate a world defined by shifting allegiances, ancient rivalries, and deeply entrenched traditional systems. His early years in exile had been marked by uncertainty, but they were also crucial to his development as a leader. During these years, he began to understand the importance of alliances and the strength that comes from unity. He was no longer the child of the prophesied greatness, nor the scorned prince of Niani. He was a leader in the making, a man whose vision extended beyond the immediate struggles to something far greater, an empire that could stand the test of time. But for this vision to be realized, he needed to first reclaim what had been stolen from him, his birthright. At the heart of Sundiata's quest for power was his deep understanding of the complexities of West African politics. The region was home to many kingdoms, each with its own set of customs, cultures, and power structures. Despite their differences, these kingdoms were all linked by the ancient tradition of the griots, the storytellers who acted as the custodians of history. The griots not only passed down the deeds of kings and warriors, but they also played a crucial role in diplomacy, using their influence to forge alliances and maintain peace. Sundiata, understanding the power of stories and symbols, realized that in order to win back his throne, he needed more than an army. He needed to be able to weave the stories of his people together into a narrative of unity and strength. While his exile had distanced him physically from his homeland, it had not severed the bond he had with the people of Niani. The Mondang people, although divided and disunited at the time, still carried within them the legacy of their ancestors, and many of them longed for a leader who could restore them to their former glory. Sundiata became a symbol of this potential, a beacon of hope in a world that had grown increasingly fragmented. But for the people to rally behind him, they needed a clear vision, one that could inspire them to rise above their fears and uncertainties. Sundiata's challenge was not only to win the hearts of his people, but to convince them that his leadership would lead them to a better future. To achieve this, Sundiata had to engage in a delicate balance of diplomacy and warfare. His first major move was to seek the support of the neighboring kingdoms. Though he was an exiled prince, Sundiata had built a reputation as a skilled warrior and a wise leader. He understood that military power alone would not secure his position. It was the alliances he forged, the loyalties he earned, and the trust he inspired that would determine his success. And so, he began to cultivate relationships with the rulers of neighboring lands, offering them the prospect of mutual benefit should they align themselves with his cause. One of the most significant of these alliances was with the kingdom of the Saso, a people who were once enemies of the Mondang but had grown disillusioned with the current state of affairs in the region. Their king, Sumanguru, was a powerful and feared ruler, but his reign was marked by tyranny and oppression. The Saso people, though loyal to their king, were beginning to question the wisdom of his rule. Sundiata, ever the astute strategist, recognized that the Saso kingdom was ripe for rebellion. By offering the Saso people a chance at freedom and a better future under his rule, Sundiata slowly won their trust. His ability to see the cracks in Sumanguru reign and exploit them would prove to be a turning point in his quest for power. But even with his growing network of allies, Sundiata faced an immense challenge: the formidable power of his enemies, particularly those who sought to undermine his claim to the throne. Sasoma, the wife of King Nair Maghan, and her son, Dankaran Tuman, continued to hold sway over the royal court of Niani. Sasoma had long sought to eliminate Sundiata as a threat to her own ambitions, and her influence within the court was significant. She had the backing of powerful factions, including key military leaders and wealthy merchants who stood to benefit from the status quo. For Sundiata, confronting her would require more than military might. It would require an understanding of the political web she had carefully woven around herself and her son. Sundiata's first move against Sasoma was not a direct confrontation. Instead, he sought to weaken her position by undermining her influence among the royal court. He used the griots, the keepers of history, to tell stories that cast doubt on her legitimacy and her leadership. These stories, though subtle, were powerful in the courtly world of Niani, where reputation and legacy were paramount. Slowly, the cracks in Sasuma's power began to show. But Sundiata knew that winning the political battle was only half the struggle. To truly defeat her, he needed to strike at the heart of her power, her hold over the military and the people. With his growing reputation and his network of allies, Sundiata began to prepare for the final confrontation. His army, though not yet large enough to face Sumanguru forces head-on, was a force to be reckoned with. The Mondang warriors who had once seen Sundiata as an exiled prince now saw him as a leader capable of restoring their land to greatness. They were drawn not only to his skill in battle, but also to his sense of justice and his vision for a united and prosperous Mali. The moment of truth came when Sundiata, having gathered a coalition of forces, marched back to Niani to challenge his rivals. The road to Niani was long and fraught with danger, but Sundiata's resolve was unwavering. His army, though smaller than the forces of Sasoma and her supporters, was united by a common cause. They fought not just for power, but for the restoration of their land, for the reclamation of their legacy. When Sundiata finally arrived at the gates of Niani, the city was on the brink of chaos. Susuma's forces were well entrenched, but her supporters were beginning to lose faith in her leadership. The people of Niani, once divided and fearful, began to rally behind Sundiata, recognizing in him the leader they had longed for. The battle for Niani was not just a physical fight. It was a battle for the soul of the people, for the very identity of the Mandang people. In the heat of battle, Sundiata demonstrated not only his military prowess, but his ability to inspire those around him. His presence on the battlefield was magnetic. His courage in the face of adversity was unmatched. The victory was decisive. Susuma's forces were defeated, and Sundiata's rightful place as the ruler of Niani was secured. But this victory was not just about reclaiming a throne. It was about fulfilling the prophecy, about embracing the destiny that had been foretold from the moment of his birth. It was the beginning of a new era for the Mandang people, one that would lead to the establishment of the Mali Empire, a kingdom that would one day stretch across much of West Africa, bringing prosperity, peace, and unity to a region long torn by conflict. Sundiata Keita's victory in Niani marked the start of a legacy that would endure for centuries. But it was not a victory won in isolation. It was a triumph built on alliances, on strategic diplomacy, and on a profound understanding of the forces that shaped the political landscape of West Africa. Through his courage, wisdom, and ability to inspire others, Sundiata had not only reclaimed his throne, but had also laid the foundation for the Mali Empire, one of the greatest civilizations in African history. Sundiata's return to Niani marked the beginning of a new chapter not only in his own life, but in the history of the Mandang people. Yet, his victory in reclaiming the throne was far from the end of his journey. It was, in fact, the start of an arduous process of rebuilding, uniting, and consolidating power in a fractured and diverse region. The challenge Sundiata faced was not merely to defeat his enemies, but to lay the foundations for an empire that could stand the test of time, one that could unite the different kingdoms of West Africa under a single banner of justice and prosperity. Though he had reclaimed his throne, Sundiata understood that the work of leadership was far more complex than winning battles. His people had been divided for years, and the wounds of civil war, political treachery, and internal strife ran deep. In many ways, Niani itself was a city marked by the scars of its recent struggles. Its royal court was filled with factions, each vying for power, each with its own agendas, desires, and ambitions. Reconciliation was necessary, not only to rebuild the kingdom, but to restore the trust and faith of the people in their leaders. Sundiata's greatest challenge, at this point, was to heal the wounds that divided his people and transform the splintered lands into a unified whole. The first step in his strategy was to consolidate his power. While his military victory had given him legitimacy, the loyalty of his people had yet to be fully secured. Many of the citizens of Niani had supported him out of necessity or fear, but Sundiata knew that true leadership could not be built on such foundations. He needed to cultivate genuine trust, and this required demonstrating a vision of leadership that was not only about might, but about justice and fairness. To achieve this, he began by revising the policies of the court and the kingdom, ensuring that the common people had a voice in the decisions that affected their lives. Sundiata's political savvy extended to his understanding of the intricate balance of power within his kingdom. He knew that the royal court was not just a place of governance, but also a hub of cultural and political influence. Thus, he began by surrounding himself with trusted advisors, many of whom had been loyal to his family even during his exile. His council was made up of individuals from various backgrounds: warriors, scholars, griots, and spiritual leaders, who represented the diversity of the Mandang people. By weaving together the wisdom and insights of different groups, Sundiata ensured that his decisions were informed by the needs of all segments of society. Simultaneously, he embarked on a series of diplomatic missions to strengthen alliances with neighboring kingdoms. West Africa, in the 13th century, was a mosaic of powerful and often warring states. While Sundiata's victory over Sassoma and her allies had secured his position in Niani, there were many other kingdoms whose loyalties were uncertain. Some had remained neutral during the battle for Niani, while others had sided with his enemies. To ensure the stability of his rule, Sundiata understood that he could not afford to alienate these kingdoms. He had to build a coalition that was as much based on diplomacy as it was on military might. He began by seeking the support of other influential rulers in the region, offering them the promise of peace, trade, and mutual cooperation. One of the most significant of these alliances was with the Kingdom of Wanyera, a prosperous and wealthy land known for its vast gold mines. The wealth of Wanyera was a powerful lure, and Sundiata's ability to persuade the king of Wanyera to join his growing coalition was a critical moment in his diplomatic strategy. By securing access to the gold of Wanyera, Sundiata not only bolstered his own resources, but also ensured that his empire would have a steady flow of wealth to fund further military campaigns, infrastructure projects, and trade ventures. In addition to the kingdom of Wanyera, Sundiata forged relationships with the Berbers, the traders from the northern deserts who had long been influential in the region. Through these alliances, Sundiata gained access to new trade routes and resources, enabling his empire to flourish economically. The Berbers also provided military expertise, further strengthening Sundiata's position. As he expanded his influence and solidified his rule, Sundiata did not overlook the importance of spiritual and cultural unity. The Mandang people had long been guided by their griots, who were not only historians and poets, but also spiritual guides. The griots held a special place in society, and Sundiata recognized their power to shape public opinion and foster loyalty. To ensure that his rule was seen as legitimate, he worked closely with the griots, encouraging them to tell stories of his deeds and his vision for the future of the Mandang people. These stories became a vital part of the cultural fabric of Mali, reinforcing Sundiata's image as the chosen leader, the one who had been destined to unite the people and restore them to greatness. The spiritual dimension of his rule was also reflected in his relationship with the great religious leaders of the time. Sundiata understood that the legitimacy of his reign depended, in part, on his ability to maintain the favor of the gods and the support of the spiritual communities. He sought to establish a harmonious relationship between his rule and the traditional religious practices of the Mandang people, incorporating elements of local belief systems into his governance, while also acknowledging the influence of Islam, which had begun to spread throughout West Africa. This balance of religious traditions helped to unify the people under a shared sense of purpose and identity. While Sundiata was focused on diplomacy and internal reform, he did not neglect the military aspect of his rule. He understood that, while peace and unity were the ultimate goals, there would always be challenges from rival kingdoms or factions that sought to undermine his authority. He maintained a strong and disciplined military, one that was capable of responding swiftly to any threat. His forces, made up of both professional soldiers and the peasant militias that he had empowered, were well organized and ready to defend the empire against external threats. As his empire grew, so too did the complexity of his governance. The territories he had united under his rule were diverse, each with its own customs, languages, and traditions. Sundiata recognized the importance of respecting these differences while also ensuring that the central authority of his government was maintained. He implemented a system of local governance, where trusted leaders from different regions were appointed to manage local affairs in accordance with the laws and customs of their people. This system allowed for the efficient management of the vast empire while also maintaining the cultural autonomy of the various regions. Sundiata's leadership was characterized by pragmatism, wisdom, and a deep understanding of the people he ruled. He knew that his success was not just due to his military victories or diplomatic skills, but also to his ability to inspire loyalty and trust among his subjects. He was a king who understood the importance of listening to his people, of understanding their needs, and of working tirelessly to improve their lives. As he looked out over the lands that he had united, Sundiata saw a future filled with promise. His empire, though still in its early stages, had the potential to become one of the greatest in West African history. The prosperity of Mali would come not only from its military might, but from its ability to foster trade, agriculture, and cultural exchange. Under Sundiata's leadership, the Mali Empire would become a beacon of strength and unity, a place where people of all backgrounds and beliefs could coexist and thrive. The work of rebuilding and uniting the empire would continue for many years, but Sundiata's vision had been set in motion. He had already begun to lay the groundwork for the powerful and prosperous Mali Empire, and with each passing day, his influence spread further across the region. His legacy, the legacy of a man who had been exiled, ridiculed, and underestimated, was beginning to take shape. It would be a legacy not just of military conquest, but of justice, unity, and the belief that greatness comes not through domination, but through the ability to bring people together for a common purpose. As Sundiata Keita's rule began to solidify and the foundations of the Mali Empire were laid, the enormity of the task ahead became clearer. Though his military victories and political alliances had secured his place as the ruler of Niani, the true challenge now lay in transforming a fractured land into a unified, prosperous empire. His reign was defined not just by the consolidation of power, but by his ability to manage an expanding kingdom and to navigate the complex, often turbulent relationships between the various peoples and territories that made up the region. Mali was not a singular entity at the time Sundiata took the throne. The lands he now ruled stretched across a vast expanse of West Africa, each territory with its own set of challenges. The people of Mali came from diverse cultural backgrounds and spoke different languages, with varied traditions, customs, and beliefs. To unify this diverse collection of peoples required more than just military might or royal decrees. It demanded a vision that embraced the differences of his subjects while binding them together under a common identity. Sundiata understood that the key to a lasting empire was not just in securing land or wealth, but in establishing the trust and loyalty of the people. His first order of business was to ensure the prosperity of the lands under his rule, particularly the agricultural sectors. Mali's economy was largely agrarian, and the fertility of its soil played a crucial role in sustaining the empire. Sundiata's strategic foresight led him to focus on the revitalization of agriculture, particularly in the regions most affected by years of war and political instability. He established a system of land distribution that was both fair and efficient. The wealth of the land was to be shared, with farmers being given access to fertile fields while also being held accountable for their production. This policy not only ensured food security for the empire, but also created a sense of ownership and participation among the people. Those who had once lived in fear and uncertainty under the reigns of previous rulers now had a stake in the prosperity of the land. This, in turn, helped to strengthen their loyalty to Sundiata. However, agricultural reform was just the beginning. Sundiata recognized the importance of trade and commerce in the development of Mali's power. The region was strategically located along several major trade routes that connected West Africa to the Mediterranean world and the Arab world. The trans-Saharan trade in gold, salt, and other goods had long been an essential part of West African wealth, and Sundiata knew that to secure Mali's future, he needed to establish a robust and thriving commercial network. To facilitate this, he undertook the task of improving and expanding the kingdom's infrastructure. He initiated the construction of roads, bridges, and other key infrastructures that would allow goods to flow more easily from one part of the empire to another. He encouraged the establishment of marketplaces where traders from across the region could come together to exchange goods and ideas. His efforts to create a more connected empire extended to the development of river transport, utilizing the Niger River to facilitate trade between the southern and northern parts of the empire. These investments in infrastructure not only helped Mali become a trading hub, but also ensured that the people living within the empire were more interconnected, fostering a sense of unity and shared purpose. While trade and agriculture were vital to Mali's prosperity, Sundiata also understood the importance of culture in solidifying the identity of the empire. The Malian people, while diverse, shared a rich tradition of storytelling, music, and art. The griots, the hereditary storytellers and historians, played a central role in the cultural life of the empire. Sundiata worked closely with the griots, ensuring that the oral history of the empire, including the stories of his own rise to power, were preserved and passed down through the generations. He also understood the power of religion in binding people together. Islam had begun to spread across West Africa, brought by traders and scholars from the north, and many of the influential leaders in Mali had already converted to the faith. However, traditional African religious practices remained a vital part of the cultural fabric of the region. Sundiata, always pragmatic, recognized the importance of both Islam and indigenous religious practices in the daily lives of his people. Rather than enforcing one religion over the other, he encouraged religious tolerance and harmony, fostering an environment where both traditions could coexist peacefully. This approach not only helped to unite the diverse peoples within his empire, but also allowed for a cultural flourishing that would define Mali for generations to come. In addition to his focus on agriculture, trade, and culture, Sundiata was deeply concerned with the creation of a stable and just legal system. The laws of the Mali Empire were rooted in a combination of customary law, Islamic law, and the decrees issued by the king. Sundiata sought to ensure that the laws were applied fairly, with an emphasis on justice and equity. He established a system of courts and judges to oversee legal matters, ensuring that disputes were resolved in a manner that was both efficient and just. The role of the griots, as keepers of history and culture, was also crucial in the legal system, as they helped to maintain records of important decisions and serve as a check on the power of the king. One of the most important aspects of Sundiata's leadership was his ability to balance power and authority. He understood that an empire of Mali's size and diversity required not only a strong central authority, but also a system of decentralized governance that would allow local leaders to manage their own affairs. He appointed trusted governors and officials to oversee the various regions of the empire, giving them significant autonomy while ensuring that they remained loyal to the central government. This balance of power allowed Sundiata to maintain control over the empire without alienating local leaders or causing resentment among the people. The empire grew stronger under Sundiata's leadership, and as Mali's influence spread, it became clear that Sundiata's vision had begun to take shape. The once fractured and divided lands had been transformed into a powerful and united kingdom, one that could rival the great empires of the Mediterranean and the Islamic world. Mali's wealth, driven by its strategic location and the resources of its lands, allowed it to become a dominant force in West Africa. The wealth of the empire was evident in the grandeur of its cities, the richness of its culture, and the strength of its military. Under Sundiata's leadership, the Mali Empire became a beacon of power and prosperity in the region. Yet, despite the empire's growing strength and wealth, Sundiata's reign was not without its challenges. The threats to the empire, both internal and external, remained ever-present. Other kingdoms in West Africa, such as the Kingdom of Songhai, watched Mali's rise with a mixture of envy and fear. The trade routes that ran through Mali also attracted the attention of foreign powers, including the Berbers and Arab traders, who sought to control the flow of goods and wealth. Sundiata knew that the stability of his empire depended not only on its military strength, but on its ability to maintain its strategic alliances and trade routes. He continued to work tirelessly to ensure the security of his empire, constantly reinforcing its borders and bolstering its military forces. Internally, Sundiata faced challenges from factions within his own court. While his leadership was generally respected, there were always those who sought to undermine his authority for their own gain. These factions, often led by rival princes or ambitious nobles, represented a constant threat to the unity of the empire. Sundiata dealt with these challenges not with brute force, but through diplomacy and subtle manipulation. He knew when to be firm and when to offer concessions, always keeping the larger picture in mind. As the years passed, Sundiata's reign became a symbol of unity, strength, and prosperity. His ability to transform a fragmented and war-torn land into a flourishing empire was a testament to his leadership and vision. He had created an empire that not only thrived in terms of wealth and power, but also in its cultural and social achievements. The legacy of Sundiata Keita was not just in the lands he conquered or the wealth he accumulated, but in the lasting impact he had on the people of Mali. His reign marked the beginning of a golden age for the Mali Empire, one that would endure for centuries and leave a lasting imprint on the history of West Africa. Sundiata Keita's reign marked a transformative period not only for the Mali Empire, but for the entire West African region. By consolidating power, establishing robust systems of governance, and fostering economic prosperity, Sundiata had succeeded in transforming a fragmented, war-torn land into one of the most formidable empires in the history of Africa. Yet, as the empire grew in wealth and influence, new challenges emerged, ones that tested both his leadership and his vision for Mali's future. The foundations Sundiata had carefully laid in his early years were about to be put to the test. Though Mali was now unified under his rule, the empire was still a collection of diverse regions, each with its own local leaders, customs, and systems of governance. While Sundiata had made great strides in centralizing power, the challenge remained of maintaining unity in such a vast and culturally varied empire. The people of Mali, though united in their allegiance to the king, still retained their individual identities tied to their own cities, tribes, and traditions. The unity of the empire was a delicate balance, and it required constant attention and care. One of the first challenges Sundiata faced in the middle of his reign was the question of succession. The process of determining a rightful heir was never straightforward, especially in a society where power was often contested and dynasties could be easily fractured by ambition or rivalry. While Sundiata had several children, the issue of succession was far more complex than simply choosing the next ruler. The legacy of his reign would be determined not only by the political stability he could maintain, but by the ability of his successors to hold together the empire he had built. Sundiata was keenly aware of the risks that came with this uncertainty. He knew that the strength of the empire depended not only on the power of the ruler, but on the legitimacy of the royal family. This meant that the succession question was not just a personal concern, but one that could ripple through the entire empire, potentially dividing his people and leaving them vulnerable to external threats. To safeguard Mali's future, Sundiata worked diligently to prepare his sons for leadership, ensuring they were equipped with the wisdom, discipline, and vision needed to lead. Despite his careful planning, succession disputes would eventually threaten to destabilize the empire. One of his sons, Mansa Musa, who was believed by many to be the rightful heir, became embroiled in a fierce conflict with his half-brothers. While Sundiata had sought to balance his empire by ensuring representation from different factions and regions, the division among his own children revealed just how fragile that balance was. The competition for the throne was not just a matter of personal ambition, but an expression of deeper regional and political tensions within Mali. Mali's central position in the trans-Saharan trade routes made it an attractive target for other kingdoms and empires. The wealth of Mali, driven by its abundant resources, especially gold, had long attracted the attention of foreign powers. For Sundiata, protecting Mali's borders was not just a military necessity, but a matter of preserving the integrity of the empire he had built. As his reign progressed, he began to face increasing external threats from both long-established rivals and emerging powers. The Kingdom of Ghana, once a powerful empire in its own right, had begun to crumble under the weight of internal strife and external pressures. The rising power of Mali, with its strategic location and growing wealth, was seen as a direct challenge to Ghana's influence. But it was not just Ghana that posed a threat. To the north, the Berber tribes were becoming more organized and aggressive, eager to control the lucrative trade routes that ran through the region. And in the east, the kingdom of Songhai, while still relatively weak, had begun to expand its influence, eager to challenge Mali's dominance in the region. For Sundiata, these external threats were not merely a matter of defense. He understood that maintaining Mali's power required both military strength and diplomatic acumen. He had already secured powerful alliances through trade, but the growing political instability in neighboring regions presented both an opportunity and a risk. In order to ensure the survival of his empire, Sundiata knew that Mali had to assert itself as the dominant power in West Africa. One of the key components of his strategy was the use of diplomacy and strategic marriage alliances. Sundiata had long understood the power of relationships, not just on the battlefield but in the courtly and political realms. His alliances with neighboring kingdoms had already played a key role in solidifying his power, and now he sought to expand these alliances through marriage and treaties. By arranging marriages between his children and the daughters of influential leaders, he sought to ensure the loyalty of powerful regional rulers, solidifying Mali's position as the heart of West Africa. At the same time, Sundiata began to refocus his attention on military reforms. While his earlier victories had secured the empire's borders, the growing threats from external powers required a more systematic approach to defense. He worked to establish a standing army, one that could be mobilized quickly in the event of an attack, and he instituted new military training programs designed to create a more disciplined, cohesive force. The success of Mali's military forces had been critical in the early years of his reign, and Sundiata knew that continued success depended on the strength and readiness of his soldiers. But Sundiata was not only concerned with the military security of his empire. He understood that an empire's strength was also determined by its ability to project power beyond its borders. This required the establishment of a network of tributary states, regions that paid tribute to Mali in exchange for protection and political stability. Through his military successes and diplomatic efforts, Sundiata expanded the reach of Mali's influence across West Africa, forging alliances with neighboring kingdoms and ensuring that his empire had a network of loyal states that could support it in times of crisis. Mali's growing wealth, fueled by its control of the gold trade, also allowed Sundiata to build a more sophisticated economy. The wealth that flowed into Mali through trade was reinvested into the empire, funding infrastructure projects, cultural patronage, and military ventures. Sundiata recognized that the prosperity of the empire was directly tied to the strength of its economy, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that Mali maintained its position as a central hub for trade and commerce. The riches of Mali were not only evident in its economic power, but in the cultural achievements that flourished under Sundiata's reign. The capital city of Niamey became a center of learning, attracting scholars, artists, and intellectuals from across Africa and the wider Islamic world. Sundiata's commitment to cultural exchange ensured that Mali was not just a military and economic powerhouse, but a center of intellectual and artistic achievement. Under his patronage, the griots, those keepers of history and tradition, continued to shape the cultural identity of the empire. Their stories, songs, and poetry were a testament to the empire's achievements and the lasting legacy of Sundiata's leadership. Yet, despite his many successes, Sundiata's reign was not without its challenges. As the empire grew, so too did the complexities of governance. Mali's size and diversity required a sophisticated system of administration, one that could maintain control over distant territories while also ensuring that the local leaders had the authority and resources to govern effectively. Sundiata worked to establish a decentralized system of governance, in which regional governors were entrusted with significant authority but were still held accountable to the central government. This balance of power allowed Mali to maintain unity while also respecting the local autonomy of its diverse regions. As Sundiata grew older, the challenges of leadership became more personal. His health began to decline, and the question of succession once again came to the forefront. Despite the preparations he had made, the question of who would succeed him as king remained a source of tension within the royal court. The internal divisions that had surfaced during his reign, particularly those within his own family, began to resurface, threatening to destabilize the empire he had worked so hard to build. Sundiata's legacy, however, was not defined solely by the challenges he faced. It was defined by his ability to overcome them, to build an empire that would stand the test of time. By the time of his death, Sundiata had achieved what few rulers in history had managed: the creation of an empire that was not only powerful but unified, one that would become the envy of the entire West African region. His legacy would endure through his children, his military victories, and the systems of governance he established. Under his successors, Mali would continue to grow and flourish, becoming one of the richest and most powerful empires in the world. But it was Sundiata who had laid the groundwork for this greatness, and his reign would forever be remembered as the foundation upon which the Mali Empire was built. Sundiata Keita's reign in the Mali Empire is often regarded as one of the most significant chapters in African history. His empire, born out of strife and conflict, quickly became one of the most prosperous and powerful states in West Africa. However, as the Mali Empire expanded and solidified its power under Sundiata's leadership, it encountered new complexities that demanded more than military prowess or diplomatic savvy. To ensure the long-term success and stability of his kingdom, Sundiata had to confront an array of challenges that would test not only his political acumen, but also his ability to adapt and evolve his vision for the future. With the consolidation of the Mali Empire came the realization that the leadership required for an empire of such magnitude could not solely rest on the shoulders of one man, no matter how capable. Sundiata knew that for the empire to survive, it needed a strong institutional framework that could endure beyond his own lifetime. He began to shift his focus from immediate military conquest to the cultivation of a more sustainable and stable system of governance. His reign, though defined by his personal strength and ability to command, was also marked by his remarkable foresight in setting the stage for the future of Mali. At the heart of Sundiata's vision was the idea of centralized power tempered by local autonomy. He understood that while the central government needed to have control over the larger political and economic decisions, the strength of the empire also relied on the cooperation and loyalty of local rulers. The territories that had been absorbed into the empire had their own long-established systems of governance, and any attempt to impose a single uniform structure from the center would only breed resentment. Instead, Sundiata implemented a system of decentralized governance that gave local rulers a degree of autonomy, while ensuring they were still accountable to the central authority. This system was based on the principle of shared responsibility. Sundiata established a network of provincial governors who were given significant authority over the day-to-day affairs of their regions. These governors, who were often local leaders or trusted military commanders, were responsible for overseeing the welfare of their people, maintaining order, and ensuring that taxes were collected. In return, they pledged their loyalty to Sundiata and recognized his supreme authority as the ruler of the empire. This system of decentralized governance helped maintain stability in the empire by respecting the local traditions and power structures while reinforcing the authority of the central government. Despite the success of this system, it was not without its challenges. The sheer size and diversity of the Mali Empire made it difficult to maintain effective control over distant regions. While the empire was vast, it was also complex, with many different ethnic groups, languages, and customs. This diversity, which had been one of the empire's strengths, also posed a risk, as the varying interests of local rulers could sometimes conflict with those of the central government. Sundiata had to strike a delicate balance between maintaining unity and respecting the cultural and political autonomy of the regions. One of the ways he navigated these challenges was by using marriage alliances to solidify his relationships with powerful regional leaders. These alliances were not only symbolic, but serve as a practical way to ensure loyalty and foster cooperation between the central government and local rulers. Sundiata married off several of his daughters and sons to influential leaders in key regions, cementing political and military ties that would prove crucial in the years to come. By intertwining the royal family with the power structures of local kingdoms, Sundiata was able to create a web of loyalty that strengthened the foundations of his empire. Sundiata's ability to maintain diplomatic and military relationships also extended beyond the borders of his empire. While Mali was one of the most powerful states in West Africa, it was far from isolated. Neighboring kingdoms, such as Songhai and the remnants of Ghana, posed both opportunities and threats. Sundiata's diplomatic strategy was to maintain a delicate balance of power, ensuring that Mali remained the dominant force in the region without provoking unnecessary conflict. He understood that Mali's power was not just derived from its military strength, but from its position as a key player in the broader West African political landscape. Trade, particularly in gold, salt, and other valuable resources, was central to the economy of Mali. The empire's wealth was largely derived from its control of the trans-Saharan trade routes, which connected West Africa to the Mediterranean world. Under Sundiata's rule, Mali became a commercial hub, attracting merchants and traders from across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. The empire's prosperity, however, also made it a target for external forces seeking to control these lucrative trade routes. Sundiata's strategy was to safeguard Mali's economic interests by forging strong trade agreements and alliances with key trading partners while simultaneously fortifying the empire's defenses against potential invaders. Mali's military strength remained a central component of its power, but Sundiata also recognized the importance of diplomacy and trade as instruments of influence. His ability to navigate the complex web of relationships between the various kingdoms and empires of West Africa allowed Mali to remain secure in the face of external pressures. While he did not shy away from military conflict when necessary, Sundiata's long-term strategy was to ensure that Mali's power was based on both its military might and its ability to maintain peaceful, mutually beneficial relationships with its neighbors. As Mali's power grew, so too did the challenges of maintaining internal stability. The empire's rapid expansion brought with it new conflicts, both within the royal court and among the various factions vying for influence. Sundiata's court, though initially united in its loyalty to him, was becoming increasingly divided as the empire grew larger and more prosperous. Regional rivalries, personal ambitions, and competing claims to the throne began to surface, threatening the cohesion of the empire. These divisions were not immediately apparent, but simmered beneath the surface, ready to erupt when Sundiata's leadership was no longer there to hold the empire together. The question of succession became a critical issue as Sundiata's health began to decline. Though he had worked diligently to prepare his sons and daughters for leadership, the prospect of a smooth transition was uncertain. In a kingdom as vast and diverse as Mali, succession disputes were inevitable. The various factions within the royal court, each with its own political interests, saw the death of the king as an opportunity to assert their dominance. Sundiata knew that the future of his empire would depend not only on the strength of his successors, but on the strength of the institutions he had built. His efforts to establish a stable, decentralized system of governance were aimed at ensuring that the empire could endure even after his death. However, he also knew that the stability of the empire would be fragile, as long as the question of succession remained unresolved. One of Sundiata's final acts as king was to solidify his legacy by ensuring that his sons and daughters were properly positioned to succeed him. He did not choose a single heir, but instead entrusted his children with different regions of the empire, giving each a degree of authority over their own territories. His hope was that, by distributing power among his children, he could create a system of checks and balances that would prevent any one faction from gaining too much control. This decision, though pragmatic, was not without its risks. The division of power among his children created the potential for infighting, and the absence of a clear successor left the empire vulnerable to internal conflict. As Sundiata grew older and his health deteriorated, he watched as his once unified empire began to show signs of strain. Yet, he remained resolute in his belief that the empire he had built would endure. His vision of a powerful, united Mali had been realized, and though the challenges of succession and governance remained, he had laid the groundwork for the future. The Mali Empire, in the years following his death, would continue to thrive under the leadership of his successors, but would also face the inevitable tensions and divisions that come with the passage of time. Sundiata Keita's legacy, however, would remain indelible. His reign marked the beginning of a golden age for Mali, one that would last for centuries. Under his rule, the empire became a beacon of strength, prosperity, and cultural achievement. His ability to balance military power, diplomatic relations, and internal governance set him apart as one of the greatest rulers in African history. While his empire would eventually face new challenges and changes, the foundations he laid during his reign would continue to shape the destiny of Mali long after his passing. Through his strategic foresight, leadership, and vision, Sundiata had created an empire that would remain a powerful force in West Africa for generations to come. Sundiata Keita's reign, marked by his triumphs in unifying the Mali Empire and establishing a strong central government, faced ever-growing complexities as the years passed. The empire he had built was now vast and prosperous, a beacon of wealth, trade, and military might across West Africa. Yet, with power came new challenges, ones that tested not only the strength of his empire, but the very principles upon which it had been founded. As Mali's borders stretched further, Sundiata's leadership was increasingly defined by the need to manage a complex web of relationships, both within his empire and with neighboring powers. The delicate balance he had forged between military strength, diplomacy, and local autonomy was being stretched as the empire grew. And with this expansion came both new opportunities and greater risks. Mali, under Sundiata's leadership, had quickly become a central player in the trans-Saharan trade network, benefiting from the riches of gold, salt, and other resources. The empire's prosperity had brought with it an influx of merchants, traders, and intellectuals from across Africa and beyond, turning cities like Niamey and Timbuktu into hubs of commerce and learning. The Mali Empire became renowned not just for its wealth, but for its intellectual and cultural achievements, attracting scholars, artists, and historians from around the world. The spread of Islam, already a growing force in the region, had also transformed the cultural and spiritual life of the empire, further enriching Mali's intellectual landscape. Despite the outward appearance of strength and prosperity, the internal stability of the empire was always at risk. The very diversity that had given Mali its strength was also a potential source of division. While Sundiata's policy of decentralizing power and allowing local rulers a degree of autonomy had been effective in ensuring loyalty to the central government, it also created a fragile system. The governors and local leaders, though largely loyal to Sundiata, were individuals with their own ambitions and sometimes competing interests. This tension, though largely kept in check during Sundiata's rule, began to grow as the empire expanded. Sundiata had worked hard to maintain a balance between central authority and regional autonomy, but the more fragmented the empire became, the harder it was to keep the peace between local factions and the central government. One of the most pressing challenges that arose was the need to secure the succession. Sundiata had fathered numerous children, each of whom had claims to the throne. This created not only potential rivalries within his own family, but also tensions among the broader nobility. The question of who would inherit Sundiata's vast empire became a critical issue, particularly as his health began to fail. The rulers of the various provinces, many of whom had benefited from Sundiata's policies of decentralization, began to assert their own claims to power. Sundiata had worked tirelessly to prepare his sons for leadership, hoping to avoid the kind of division that had plagued other empires in West Africa. But the internal dynamics of his court made this an increasingly difficult challenge. The rivalry between his sons and the competing interests within the royal family meant that succession could potentially divide the empire, destabilizing the unity Sundiata had fought so hard to create. The growing tension within the court was exacerbated by the ambition of powerful regional leaders who sought to carve out more power for themselves. These leaders, many of whom had helped Sundiata in his rise to power, were now looking to solidify their positions. As the empire expanded, the governors of the different provinces grew more powerful, with each one managing large territories and controlling vital resources. While Sundiata had maintained a delicate balance of power during his reign, his death would leave a vacuum that many local leaders would seek to fill. This internal power struggle was a reflection of the very structure of the empire, which had been designed to be flexible and responsive to local needs, but was also susceptible to division when the central authority weakened. Externally, Mali faced increasing pressure from rival powers. The Songhai Kingdom, to the east, had begun to rise as a formidable military and political force. While Songhai had been a relatively minor kingdom during Sundiata's earlier years, its strategic location and growing power made it a serious threat to Mali's dominance in West Africa. The kings of Songhai, eager to expand their influence, sought to challenge Mali's control over vital trade routes and territories. The presence of external threats, like Songhai, meant that Mali could not afford internal disunity. Sundiata, in his later years, had worked hard to ensure the security of his empire, forging alliances with neighboring kingdoms and reinforcing Mali's military strength. However, the rising power of Songhai and the internal divisions that threatened to tear the empire apart made the future uncertain. The threat from Songhai was not just military. It also had economic implications. The trans-Saharan trade routes, which had made Mali one of the wealthiest empires in the region, were increasingly under pressure. Songhai's military buildup posed a direct threat to the security of these trade routes, and the possibility of losing control over these routes would have devastating consequences for the empire's economy. Sundiata, always astute in his strategic thinking, understood the importance of maintaining control over these routes, as they were essential to the continued flow of gold, salt, and other goods that fueled the prosperity of Mali. However, as the empire's attention was drawn to internal struggles and the question of succession, the ability to maintain control over Mali's economic lifelines was beginning to slip. In addition to the growing external pressures, Mali faced challenges within its own borders. The expansion of Islam, which had become a dominant force in the empire, created tensions between traditional religious practices and the growing influence of Islamic leaders. Though Sundiata had been careful to create a political system that was inclusive of various religious practices, the rise of Islam in Mali had brought new dynamics to the empire's religious landscape. Many local rulers, particularly in the more remote areas of the empire, continued to adhere to traditional African religions, and the increasing influence of Islam created a subtle but undeniable friction. This tension was particularly evident in the northern provinces, where Islam was more deeply rooted. The question of how to integrate these different religious traditions without creating conflict was an ongoing challenge for Sundiata's successors. Despite these challenges, Sundiata's legacy remained a central element of the empire's strength. His vision of a united, prosperous Mali continued to inspire the people, even as they faced political and economic uncertainties. Under his rule, the Mali Empire had become a symbol of African greatness, both in terms of its wealth and its cultural achievements. The wealth of Mali, drawn from its vast resources of gold and salt, continued to be a source of pride for its people, and its cultural influence spread far beyond the borders of the empire. Timbuktu, Niamey, and other cities of the empire became centers of learning, attracting scholars, artists, and traders from across the Islamic world and beyond. Mali's reputation as a center of knowledge and culture endured long after Sundiata's death. As Sundiata's reign came to a close, the fate of his empire was uncertain. His vision had created a powerful empire, but the tensions within the royal court, the growing ambitions of regional leaders, and the external pressures from rival kingdoms posed serious challenges to the empire's future. The internal divisions within the royal family and the competing claims to the throne left the empire vulnerable to fracturing. The Songhai kingdom's rise as a rival power further complicated the situation, with both economic and military ramifications. Despite these challenges, however, the foundation Sundiata had built remained solid. His ability to unify the diverse peoples of Mali, his strategic thinking, and his commitment to economic prosperity had created an empire that would continue to influence the region for generations to come. Sundiata Keita's reign is remembered not just for the military victories and territorial expansion he achieved, but for his deep understanding of the complexities of empire building. His leadership had been characterized by a blend of pragmatism and vision, allowing him to navigate the intricacies of governance, diplomacy, and culture. While the challenges faced by his empire in the years following his death were significant, Sundiata's legacy would continue to inspire those who followed in his footsteps. The Mali Empire, though tested by internal divisions and external threats, remained a beacon of strength and cultural achievement for centuries. Through his efforts, Sundiata had secured a place in history as one of the greatest rulers of West Africa, and his legacy would endure long after the political landscape of the region had shifted. As the Mali Empire entered its maturity, it became clear that Sundiata Keita's efforts to forge a unified, prosperous, and resilient state had set the stage for an era of extraordinary achievements. Yet, the empire he had built was not impervious to the natural forces of change, and the growing tensions between centralized and decentralized power within the empire threatened to unravel the very fabric of unity that had been the cornerstone of Sundiata's rule. His legacy, while immense in its historical importance, would be tested by the very systems he had put in place, which, though designed to create balance, were now coming into conflict with the emerging ambitions of his heirs and the rising challenges both within and outside the empire. Sundiata's success was deeply rooted in his ability to consolidate power after a period of fragmentation and instability, and much of the foundation of the Mali Empire rested on the delicate equilibrium between the centralized power of the throne and the regional autonomy given to local leaders. These local leaders, or vassals, had played a critical role in helping Sundiata achieve victory over his enemies, and they were entrusted with governing the vast regions that made up the empire. However, as Sundiata's reign continued, the growing influence of these regional leaders began to create tensions that would later become a source of instability. The decentralization of power, though initially essential to the stability of the empire, began to foster rivalries and disputes over territorial control. Local rulers, once loyal to Sundiata, started asserting their independence, threatening the unity of the empire. The question of succession remained at the forefront of political discourse in the years following Sundiata's rule. With multiple sons and daughters from different wives, each of whom had varying degrees of political and military support, the transition of power would not be straightforward. Sundiata's own political acumen had allowed him to navigate the complexities of dynastic succession, but with his passing, the empire was at risk of being torn apart by factionalism. The question of who would inherit the mantle of leadership, the legitimate heir or one of the more ambitious regional leaders, was contentious and fraught with the potential for civil war. In the court of Sundiata's sons and daughters, as well as among the powerful regional governors, the power struggles were palpable. Some of Sundiata's sons, having been groomed for leadership from an early age, held the belief that they had the right to rule as the successors of their father. Meanwhile, other leaders, notably the more ambitious regional governors, began to see the weakness of a divided court as an opportunity to assert their own claims to the throne. The increasing independence of these governors, coupled with their control over the resources and manpower of their regions, made them formidable competitors for control of the empire. The decentralized system that Sundiata had championed now appeared to be a double-edged sword, providing local rulers with the autonomy they needed to govern their territories, but also creating an environment in which the imperial center was increasingly undermined. The growing power of these regional governors, compounded by the disputes over succession, led to a more fragmented political landscape. Each faction, whether led by a son of Sundiata or a regional leader, began to carve out spheres of influence within the empire, further complicating efforts to maintain central authority. Sundiata's vision of a strong, unified Mali was under threat, not from external forces but from the very leaders who had once pledged allegiance to him. The empire that had been built on the principle of unity and cooperation was now on the brink of civil strife, as the sons and daughters of Sundiata and their respective factions vied for power. Externally, the rising threat from neighboring states only added to the empire's vulnerabilities. The Songhai Empire, once a relatively small and insignificant kingdom, had grown in power and ambition, largely due to the weakening of Mali's centralized authority. The Songhai kings saw an opportunity in Mali's internal struggles and began to assert their own dominance, challenging Mali's control over the vital trade routes and territories. The expansion of Songhai posed a direct threat to Mali's economic and political stability. If Songhai managed to gain control of the trade routes that passed through Mali's territory, it could severely cripple the empire's wealth, thereby weakening its position in the region. While Songhai's rise was an immediate concern, Mali also faced growing pressure from other external forces. The Berbers, a powerful group of traders and warriors from the north, had long been a destabilizing force in the region. Their control over trade routes made them formidable adversaries for the Mali Empire. As the Berbers sought to expand their influence, Mali's wealth and strategic location became an increasingly attractive target. Sundiata had always understood the need to safeguard Mali's borders, and his military campaigns had been designed to secure the empire's boundaries from external threats. However, his successors would find it much more difficult to maintain this security, given the empire's internal divisions and the increasing competition for power among its regional leaders.